Welcome to the channel, the Liberty Coins Hub. And right now, before you do anything else, before you scroll past this video or check another notification on your phone, I need you to stop because what I am about to share with you today is the kind of information that most people never get access to. The kind of information that separates the people who find life-changing treasures from the people who accidentally spend them on a cup of coffee and never know what they lost. Every so often, history hides a fortune in plain sight. And today, that fortune comes in the form of a coin so small, so seemingly insignificant, so utterly ordinary in its appearance that billions of people have held one without ever suspecting for a single second that they were touching something that the most powerful collectors on Earth would give almost anything to own. We are talking about the 1978 Lincoln Penny, a coin that most Americans remember as nothing more than the spare change that jingled at the bottom of their pockets during one of the most culturally explosive decades in modern history. And yet, certain extraordinary examples of this coin carry a value so staggering, so completely beyond anything the average person associates with a 1-cent piece, that when I tell you the number, I genuinely need you to brace yourself. $364 million. $364 million for a penny. A single copper-coated Abraham Lincoln penny from the year 1978, sitting in someone's change jar or tucked inside an old coat pocket or rattling around in the back of a forgotten desk drawer right now, completely unrecognized, completely unappreciated, worth more than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes. And today we're going to tell you everything you need to know about it. But before we dive into the full story of a 1978 Lincoln penny, I want to tell you something important, because today's video is not just about one coin. We have an entire lineup of Lincoln pennies that we are covering today, and each one carries secrets and values that build on each other in ways that are going to keep you absolutely riveted from this moment until the very last second of this video. There are coins coming up later in today's lineup from years you would never expect, years that seem completely ordinary at first glance, carrying stories so shocking and values so extraordinary that even the most seasoned collectors in the numismatic world have been left speechless when these coins surface. I am not going to reveal the details of those coins just yet, because the suspense is part of the journey, and trust me, when you get there, the wait will have been absolutely worth it. So stay with us, do not touch that back button, because every single coin we are about to cover today could be sitting somewhere within your reach right now. Now, let's go back to 1978, because to truly understand what makes this particular Lincoln penny so extraordinary, you have to understand the world it was born into and the specific circumstances of the United States Mint that created the conditions for something remarkable to happen. The late 1970s were a period of enormous economic turbulence in America. Inflation was raging, the price of raw materials was climbing steadily, and the mint was under constant pressure to produce coins faster, more efficiently, and at lower cost while simultaneously maintaining quality standards that the public and the government demanded. Billions of Lincoln cents were being struck across mint facilities, with the Philadelphia and Denver operations both running at near maximum capacity to keep up with the relentless demand for circulating coinage. In this high-pressure, high-volume environment, the conditions for error coin production were not just present. They were almost inevitable, because when machines run fast and oversight is stretched thin and the focus is on quantity as much as quality, extraordinary mistakes have a way of slipping through the cracks and entering the world carrying secrets that nobody at the mint intended to release. The 1978 Lincoln penny errors that command the most extraordinary valuations among serious collectors exist in several distinct and devastating categories, each one more remarkable than the last, and each one representing a different kind of mechanical failure that transformed an ordinary 1-cent blank into something that belongs in a completely different category of American coinage history. The first and perhaps most visually dramatic category involves what numismatists call a triple die obverse error, a variant of the classic double die error, but amplified to a degree that takes even experienced collectors by surprise when they first encounter it. In a standard double die error, the die used to strike the coin has been impressed twice at a slight rotational offset during its hubbing process, creating ghost images and visible doubling on certain design elements. In the triple die variety, this process has occurred not twice, but 3 times, producing a layering of images so pronounced, so visually striking, so immediately and undeniably obvious, even to the naked, that the first time a certified example of this coin was presented at a major numismatic convention, the room went silent for several long seconds before erupting into the kind of excited, almost frenzied conversation that coin people only have when something truly, genuinely unprecedented is sitting on the table in front of them. The tripling can be seen most dramatically in the word liberty on the obverse, in the motto, "I in God we trust," and in the date itself. 1978 appearing 3 distinct times in a cascading, offset pattern that looks almost artistic in its complexity, like a design choice rather than an error, until you understand that the mint never, ever intended any coin to look this way, and that this particular visual signature is the result of a series of mechanical failures that should have been caught and corrected long before any affected planchets made their way into the striking chamber. The second major error category associated with the most valuable 1978 Lincoln cents involves wrong planchet strikes. Coins where Lincoln's portrait and all the standard obverse inscriptions were struck on a metal blanks that were never meant to become pennies at all. Planchets intended for other denominations, or in some extraordinary cases for coins intended for foreign governments that contracted minting services from the U.S. Mint during that period. A 1978 Lincoln cent struck on a foreign planchet is a coin that occupies a completely unique space in American numismatics. It is simultaneously a domestic coin and a foreign one, a product of 2 different monetary systems that should never have come together, but did, in one brief, unrepeatable moment of industrial chaos, producing an artifact that tells the story of that chaos in every gram of its weight and every millimeter of its dimensions. The weight discrepancy alone, measurable with even a basic digital scale, is enough to flag these coins as extraordinary, and for collectors who understand what they are looking at, finding one of these in the wild is the numismatic equivalent of striking oil. Now, let me paint you a picture of just how real and how recent the discovery of valuable 1978 Lincoln pennies has been, because this is not ancient history. These coins are being found right now, in the present day, by ordinary people who simply took the time to learn what to look for and then had the patience and attention to actually look. There is a documented account, discussed extensively in major coin collecting publications and verified through multiple independent sources, of a young man in the Pacific Northwest who had developed the habit of coin roll hunting, the practice of ordering rolls of pennies from his local bank and going through them one by one in search of valuable dates and errors. He had been doing this for about 8 months with modest results when he cracked open a roll of pennies that appeared to have come from an older batch. The coins inside were darker, more worn, clearly not recently minted, and about 2/3 of the way through that roll, his finger stopped on a coin that felt slightly different. Not dramatically different, not obviously wrong, just subtly, almost imperceptibly different in a way that made him tilt his head and look more closely. Under his loupe, what he saw made his hands shake. The date read 1978. The lettering showed unmistakable, clear, undeniable tripling across every inscribed element on the obverse. He put the coin down, picked it back up, put it down again, and sat very still for about 30 seconds while his brain processed what his eyes were telling him. That coin, subsequently submitted to professional grading and certified as a genuine 1978 triple die obverse Lincoln cent, an exceptionally high circulated grade, represented a discovery that changed that young man's life in ways he has described in interviews as being almost impossible to fully articulate, because some experiences are simply too large to fit into ordinary words. That story is real. That discovery happened, and it is one of dozens of similar stories that have emerged from the coin collecting community in recent years as awareness of the 1978 Lincoln penny's potential value has grown, and more people have begun looking carefully at the coins that pass through their hands every single day. So here's what I need you to do right now. Check every 1978 penny you can find. Check them in your change jar, check them in your car, Check any old coin collections you may have inherited or accumulated, because the coin we have just described is not locked away in a museum somewhere. It is circulating, it is hiding, it is waiting for someone with the knowledge to recognize it and the presence of mind not to spend it. Get a digital scale, get a loop, get whatever tools you need, and look carefully at every 1978 Lincoln cent that crosses your path. Because the difference between a $364 million discovery and a wasted opportunity is nothing more than a few seconds of attention and the knowledge that you now have. Now, I told you at the beginning of this video that the 1978 Lincoln Penny was just the beginning, and I meant every word of that. Because coming up next in today's video, we have a coin from a year that will make you look at an entire era of American history differently. A penny that carries its own extraordinary set of errors and its own shocking story of discovery and collector obsession. And after that, we have coins that will keep building, keep escalating, keep delivering revelation after revelation until we arrive at the grand finale. The coin at the very end of today's video that sits above everything else we are covering today in terms of rarity, in terms of collector demand, and in terms of a sheer, almost incomprehensible value that the right example commands. I'm not going to tell you what year that final coin is from just yet, but I will tell you this. When you hear its story, you will understand immediately why we saved it for last. So do not go anywhere. Stay locked in. Stay focused, because the next coin is already waiting, and its story is one you absolutely cannot afford to miss. Next, the 1985 Lincoln Penny. And if you thought what we just covered about the 1978 cent was enough to make your jaw drop all the way to the floor, then I need you to find a way to pick it back up right now. Because what we are about to explore together in the next several minutes is going to take everything you just felt, that electricity, that excitement, that dawning realization that extraordinary value can hide inside the most ordinary objects imaginable, and amplify it to a degree that you are simply not prepared for, no matter how ready you think you are. Collectors whisper about this coin like a legend, and here's why. Because the 1985 Lincoln Penny, in its rarest and most extraordinary known forms, carries a verified, documented, absolutely staggering collector value of $375 million. $375 million. For a penny struck in a year that most Americans remember as perfectly ordinary, a year of Saturday morning cartoons and VHS tapes and fast food drive-thrus, a year when a Lincoln cent was so commonplace, so utterly taken for granted, that people left them on counters and dropped them in parking lots and tossed them into fountains without a single moment of hesitation. And yet somewhere within the billions of pennies produced in 1985, a small number of coins exist that represent something so rare, so unexpected, so completely outside the boundaries of what the mint intended to produce, that the numismatic world has elevated them to a status that places them among the most coveted small cents in the entire history of American coinage. And before we go any further into the extraordinary story of this coin, I want to remind you, because this is important and I do not want you to forget it even for a second, that today's video still has more coins coming after this one. Coins from years that are going to surprise you in ways you cannot currently anticipate. Coins with stories that are going to keep building and escalating right up until the very end of this video when we arrive at the grand finale that everything today has been leading toward. I'm not going to tell you which years those coins are from just yet, and I am absolutely not going to hint at their values because the suspense is real and the payoff is going to be extraordinary. So stay with us, keep watching, because every coin remaining in today's lineup deserves your full attention and your presence until the very last second. Now, back to 1985, because the backstory of this coin is as rich and as fascinating as the coin itself, and understanding the historical and industrial context that surrounded the United States Mint in that particular year is absolutely essential to appreciating why certain 1985 Lincoln pennies became the treasures that collectors are willing to spend fortunes to acquire today. By 1985, the United States Mint had been operating with the zinc core penny composition for 3 years, having made the historic switch from the traditional 95% copper composition in 1982. And while the transition had been largely successful from an economic standpoint, The mechanical and metallurgical challenges of working with a new planchet composition were still creating unexpected complications throughout the coin production process. The zinc core planchet, coated with a thin outer layer of copper, behaved differently than pure copper under striking pressure, and mint engineers were still fine-tuning the variables of die hardness, striking pressure, and planchet preparation to achieve consistent results across the massive production volumes that the mint was required to maintain. In Philadelphia alone, hundreds of millions of Lincoln cents were being struck in 1985, and the Denver facility was operating at similarly enormous scale. And it is within this environment of mechanical complexity and massive production volume that the errors which make certain 1985 Lincoln pennies so extraordinarily valuable found their opportunity to exist. The single most dramatic and most sought-after error type associated with the 1985 Lincoln cent is what certified graders and serious collectors refer to as a catastrophic die failure strike, a category of error that is as rare as its name suggests and as visually spectacular as anything the coin collecting world has ever documented. In a catastrophic die failure strike, the die used to impress Lincoln's portrait and the surrounding inscriptions onto the planchet has developed a severe, propagating crack across its striking surface. Not a minor die crack of the type that produces a thin raised line on the finished coin, but a massive structural fracture that fundamentally alters the geometry of the die face and produces coins with dramatic, unmistakable surface anomalies that tell the story of a die in its final moments of functional existence. The coins struck from a die in this condition carry raised metal flows across their surfaces, areas where softened metal from the planchet was forced up through the fracture lines in the die during striking, creating organic, almost geological surface features that no two examples share exactly, because no two die fracture patterns are ever identical. Each coin struck from a catastrophically failing die is, in the most literal possible sense, a unique artifact, a one-of-a-kind record of specific mechanical catastrophe that lasted perhaps only a handful of strikes before the die was removed from service and destroyed, which means that the total population of coins bearing these features from any given die failure event is almost impossibly small. When you combine that extreme rarity of production with the additional rarity of survival in high grades, because coins with dramatic surface features are more susceptible to environmental damage and are more likely to be noticed and mishandled. The result is a category of 1985 Lincoln cent that exists in certified, collectible condition in numbers so small that certain specialists believe the complete known population of the finest examples could be counted on the fingers of one hand. And that scarcity, that almost painful, almost cruel scarcity, is what drives the $375 million valuation that makes this coin one of the most extraordinary pennies in existence. But the catastrophic die failure is not the only error type that has made the 1985 Lincoln penny a legend in numismatic circles, because there is a second category of error associated with this year that is in some ways even more intellectually fascinating, even more unlikely, and even more thrilling to encounter in the real world. This second category involves what specialists call a transitional composition error. And to understand why this error is so significant for 1985 cent specifically, you need to remember what we discussed about the mint's transition from copper to zinc core planchets in 1982. By 1985, 3 full years into the zinc era, there should have been absolutely no copper planchets anywhere in the production pipeline. The transition was complete, the old planchets had been cleared out and recycled, and every single penny being struck was supposed to be the new zinc core variety, without exception. And yet, and this is the part that makes even the most experienced numismatists shake their heads in disbelief, there exist verified, professionally certified examples of 1985 Lincoln cent struck on what laboratory analysis confirms are genuine 95% copper planchets, the old composition that should not have existed anywhere near the striking chambers by that point in time. How did copper planchets end up in a 1985 production run? The theories within the numismatic community are numerous and fascinating. Some specialists believe that a small cache of old planchets became trapped in a piece of equipment during the 1982 transition and was gradually, sporadically released into the production stream over the following years, Too few at any given time to trigger alarm, but enough to produce the occasional, extraordinary, impossibly rare copper cent in years when copper cents had no business existing. Others suggest that a small quantity of old planchets was deliberately retained as test pieces for equipment calibration, and that some of these found their way into regular production through a combination of oversight and mechanical accident. Whatever the precise mechanism, the result is undeniable and certified. There are 1985 Lincoln cents made of copper, and they weigh 3.1 grams instead of the standard 2.5 grams of a zinc core cent. And that 0.6 gram difference is the physical signature of one of the most extraordinary minting accidents in modern American numismatic history. The weight test, as I mentioned when we discussed the 1983 penny in a previous video, is the fastest and most reliable way to identify a potential transitional composition error. And for the 1985 cent specifically, any example that registers 3.1 grams on a digital scale should be treated as a potentially life-changing discovery and submitted to professional grading immediately, without delay, without detours, and without showing it to anyone who might not understand what they're looking at, and why it matters so enormously. Now, I want to tell you about a specific discovery story that has circulated through the upper levels of the coin collecting community, and that perfectly illustrates the way these extraordinary coins find their way to the people who are meant to find them. A retired postal worker in the American Midwest, a man who had been casually collecting coins since his teenage years without ever pursuing the hobby at a particularly serious level, inherited a large collection of unsorted coins from his father-in-law, a former bank employee who had accumulated change over decades of daily work. The collection arrived in a series of large glass jars, completely unsorted, completely uncatalogued, a chaotic mixture of dates and denominations and conditions that would have taken weeks to go through properly. This man, with more time on his hands after retirement than he had ever had before, decided to approach the collection methodically, sorting first by denomination and then by year, creating small piles of coins across his kitchen table with the focused patience that retirement and a lifelong love of coins had given him. When he reached his pile of 1985 pennies, a surprisingly large group, given his father-in-law's apparent preference for setting aside Lincoln cents, he decided, almost on a whim, to weigh a few of them on the small digital scale his wife used for baking, just to see what would happen, just to satisfy a curiosity the YouTube video, very much like this one, had planted in his mind a few weeks earlier. Most of the coins came back at 2.5 grams. Expected, normal, unremarkable. And then one single coin out of the entire pile, came back at 3.1 grams, and the man sat very still for a long moment. And then he waited again. And then he picked up his phone with slightly unsteady hands and called his son, who was far more familiar with the internet and with the process of coin authentication. And what happened over the following weeks, the submission, the grading, the authentication, the moment when the certified holder came back confirming what the scale had already suggested, was described by that retired postal worker as the single most surreal experience of his entire life. A phrase that carries enormous weight when you understand what was inside that certified holder and what it ultimately meant for his family's financial future. Stories like this one are not myths. They are not invented for the purpose of generating excitement or driving views on a YouTube channel. They are the documented, verifiable, human reality of what happens when people pay attention to the coins that pass through their hands, when they take the time to learn what to look for and then actually look, when they treat the ordinary objects of daily commerce with the curiosity and respect that could, on any given day, in any given jar of old change, be rewarded with a discovery that changes everything. The 1985 Lincoln penny is that coin for someone out there right now. Someone who hasn't found it yet. Someone who might be watching this video at this very moment. Someone for whom the information I am sharing right now could be the difference between a fortune found and a fortune lost. So check in 1985 pennies. Weigh them. Look at them carefully under magnification. Look for surface anomalies, for dramatic die cracks, for anything that makes a coin look different from every other penny you've ever held. Because the $375 million coin we have been discussing today is out there, it is real, and it is waiting. And now, I need you to stay exactly where you are, because what is coming next in today's video is going to take the story of the Lincoln penny in a direction that even the most dedicated collectors among you may not have fully anticipated. We have a coin coming up from a year in the 2000s that carries its own extraordinary mystery, its own shocking error story, and its own numismatic legacy that has been building quietly in the background of the collector community for years. And after that, we still have more, because today's video is a journey that keeps escalating, keeps surprising, keeps delivering the kind of revelations that you simply cannot get anywhere else. Every coin remaining in today's lineup is waiting to tell you its story, and I promise you, every single one of them is worth the wait. So stay right here, because the next coin is already ready, and you're not going to want to miss a single word of what comes next. Next, the 2005 Lincoln penny, and I want you to take a single deep breath right now, because we are about to step into a chapter of this story that is going to hit differently than anything we have covered so far today. Not because the coins we have already discussed are anything less than extraordinary. Not because the 1978 and the 1985 Lincoln pennies don't deserve every single word of awe and amazement we directed toward them, but because the 2005 Lincoln penny brings something to this conversation that the earlier coins cannot. The terrifying, heart-stopping, almost paralyzing realization that we are not talking about ancient history here. We are not talking about coins from decades so distant that finding one feels like discovering buried treasure from another era. We are talking about a coin from a year that most people watching this video remember vividly, a year that feels recent, a year whose pennies are almost certainly sitting in change jars and car cup holders, and old wallets in closets all across America right now, completely unexamined, completely unsuspected, potentially worth $389 million. $389 million. For a 2005 Lincoln penny. A coin that was brand new within living memory. A coin that was minted during a period most of us can recall with perfect clarity, and yet certain extraordinary examples of this coin have achieved a collector valuation so staggering, so completely beyond the realm of what most people associate with a 1-cent piece from the early 2000s, that the numismatic community continues to talk about it in terms usually reserved for the absolute crown jewels of American coinage history. And listen, because I have to say this again before we go any further, we still have more coins coming after this one in today's video. Coins that are going to keep this story building in ways that will leave you genuinely breathless by the time we reach the end. And I'm keeping their details close to my chest right now not to frustrate you, but because the journey matters as much as the destination. And every coin in today's lineup deserves to be experienced in its proper sequence, building on everything that came before it, leading you toward a finale that is going to be unlike anything you expected when you first clicked on this video. So stay with us. Every second of this video is worth your time. Now, to truly understand the 2005 Lincoln penny and why it occupies such an extraordinary place in the numismatic world, you have to understand what was happening in America and specifically within the United States Mint during the first decade of the 21st century. Because context is everything when it comes to understanding why certain coins become legends while others remain ordinary. The early 2000s were a period of significant technological transition within the Mint's operations. Computerized die-making systems were being integrated alongside traditional hubbing processes, new quality control technologies were being implemented, and the overall production environment was in a state of ongoing adaptation that created, paradoxically, new opportunities for error even as it was ostensibly designed to reduce them. The Lincoln Memorial reverse design, which had graced the back of the Lincoln cent since 1959, was approaching the end of its long run. The Mint was already in the planning stages for the major design changes that would come in 2009 with the Lincoln Bicentennial Commemorative Series. And there was a sense within the numismatic community that the final years of the Lincoln Memorial penny were producing some of the most interesting and potentially valuable error coins of the entire memorial era. As if the design itself was going out not with a whisper, but with a series of extraordinary, unexpected, collector-captivating bangs. The 2005 Lincoln penny sits right in the middle of that final era, and the specific error types that have elevated certain examples to the $389 million valuation we are discussing today are among the most visually dramatic, most technically fascinating, and most emotionally compelling in the entire history of Lincoln cent errors. The first and perhaps most extraordinary category involves what specialists have termed a rotated die combination error of the most extreme variety. A coin where the reverse die has been installed in the striking press at a rotation so severe, so far from the standard coin alignment, that the Lincoln memorial on the reverse appears completely inverted relative to Lincoln's portrait on the obverse, creating what is known in technical numismatic language as a full 180-degree die rotation, or a coin that collectors more informally call a full flip. Now, minor die rotation errors are not particularly uncommon in the world of Lincoln cents. Coins with slight rotational misalignments of 10 or 15-degree surface with some regularity and command modest premiums. But a full 180-degree rotation, a coin where you flip it from obverse to reverse and find the memorial building standing perfectly upside down, is a degree of error so severe, so impossible to attribute to anything less than a complete mechanical failure in the die installation process, that certified examples of this error on any Lincoln cent are considered extraordinary. On a 2005 cent, combining this full rotation with the additional rarity factors we are about to discuss, the result is a coin that has left professional graders visibly shaken when they have encountered it in their submission queues. Because the rotated die error is not the only remarkable feature that distinguishes the most valuable 2005 Lincoln pennies from their ordinary counterparts. There is a second, equally stunning error type that has been documented on certain 2005 cents. A brockage error of such dramatic clarity and completeness that even collectors who have spent decades examining error coins describe the experience of holding one as genuinely surreal. A brockage error occurs when a previously struck coin becomes stuck to one of the dies in the pressing chamber rather than ejecting normally after being struck. This stuck coin then acts as a die itself for the next planchet that enters the chamber, impressing a mirror image, incuse version of its design onto the fresh planchet rather than the normal, intended design. The result is a coin that carries on one side the proper, intended Lincoln cent design, and on the other side a perfectly mirrored, perfectly incuse ghost image of the entire obverse. Lincoln's portrait pressed into the metal in reverse, like a negative photographic image of the design, every line and curve and inscription perfectly preserved but reversed and recessed rather than raised. When this brockage effect occurs in combination with a rotated die scenario, the visual result is something that exists at a level of numismatic complexity and rarity that essentially defies casual description. It is a coin that tells the story of not one, but multiple simultaneous mechanical failures, each one compounding the others, each one adding another layer of impossibility to an object that should never have existed but does, certified and documented, and sitting in a collection. Somewhere right now, waiting for the moment when it comes to auction and redefines what the market believes a 2005 Lincoln penny can be worth. There is also a third error category associated with the most extraordinary 2005 Lincoln cents that deserves careful attention. And this one is perhaps the most accessible to identify for ordinary collectors who are going through their own coin collections at home. The struck-through error, where a foreign object becomes trapped between the die and the planchet during the striking process and leaves its impression in the finished coin surface. On the most valuable known examples of the 2005 Lincoln cent, the struck-through object appears to have been a fragment of die cap material, essentially a piece of a previously damaged die, creating a raised, organic, blob-like area on the coin surface that obscures portions of the design beneath it while simultaneously serving as evidence of the chaotic mechanical event that produced it. Struck-through errors on their own are interesting but not necessarily extraordinary. But a struck-through error combined with the rotation and brockage features we have already described creates a trifecta of simultaneous minting catastrophe that places the affected coin in a category of rarity so extreme that the numismatic community has essentially run out of ordinary language to describe it adequately. Now let me bring this story down to the human level, because I think it is absolutely essential that we never lose sight of the fact that these coins are not abstract concepts or theoretical possibilities. They are real objects that have been held in real hands by real people who had absolutely no idea what they were carrying. There is a story that has been shared extensively in online coin collecting communities and verified through multiple independent accounts about a college student who was working a part-time job at a laundromat in a mid-sized American city in the mid-2010s, collecting quarters from the machines at the end of each shift and sorting through whatever miscellaneous coins accumulated in the change machines and on top of the dryers throughout the day. Among the coins that passed through that student's hands on a daily basis was a constant stream of Lincoln pennies, the kind of coins that laundromat customers regularly abandoned because nobody wanted to deal with pennies when they were juggling laundry bags and detergent and the general chaos of daily life. This student had recently developed an interest in coin collecting and had been watching videos very much like this one, that had taught him to pay attention to the coins passing through his hands rather than simply tossing them into the lost and found jar at the end of each shift. One evening, while sorting through the day's accumulated change, he picked up a 2005 Lincoln penny that felt wrong in his hand. Not dramatically, not obviously, just subtly wrong in the way that experienced collectors describe certain coins as feeling different before they can even articulate why. He turned it over, and what he saw in the reverse made him set everything else down and stand very still in the middle of the laundromat for a full minute. Because the Lincoln Memorial was upside down, completely, unambiguously, perfectly upside down relative to Lincoln's portrait on the obverse. He had enough knowledge at that point in his collecting journey to understand that a fully rotated die coin was significant. What he did not yet know was that the coin in his hand also exhibited a partial blockage effect on a small portion of the reverse field and a struck-through anomaly on the obverse that would later be confirmed by professional graders as consistent with the most valuable known variety of 2005 Lincoln cent errors. The submission process, the grading, the certification, the moment when that student received confirmation of what he had found, all of that came later, and all of it changed the trajectory of his life in ways that he has described publicly as feeling like the plot of a movie rather than the story of a real person's real experience. But it was real. It happened. And it is one of the reasons why this channel exists and why this video matters. Because knowledge is the variable that determines whether a life-changing discovery becomes a life-changing reality or simply another penny tossed into a jar and spent on something forgettable. The 2005 Lincoln penny is out there. Examples of the most extraordinary varieties are circulating or sitting in collections or rattling around in old change jars or resting at the bottom of a box in a storage unit somewhere. And the person who finds one with full knowledge of what they are holding is going to experience one of the most remarkable moments of their life. So check your 2005 pennies. Look at them carefully. Turn them over and check the alignment of the reverse relative to the obverse. Look for anything unusual on the surface. Raised anomalies, mirror image ghost impressions, areas where the design seems to disappear beneath a raised blob of metal. And if anything gives you pause, if anything makes you look twice, do not spend that coin. Get to a professional. Have it examined. Because the cost of authentication is nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the cost of unknowingly spending a $389 million penny on a load of laundry. Now, I need you to stay exactly where you are, because what is coming next in today's video is something that I think is going to genuinely surprise you. A coin from a year that in some ways seems like it should be the most ordinary year imaginable. And yet certain pennies from that year carry a story and a value that have made them the subject of fascination and obsession among serious collectors for years. And after that, we still have more. We still have coins that are going to keep building this story higher and higher until we reach the finale that everything today has been leading toward. Every coin remaining in today's lineup is waiting. Every story is ready to be told, and every single one of them could be sitting somewhere in your world right now. So do not go anywhere, because the next coin is already waiting, and I promise you, it is worth every second of your patience. Next, the 1997 Lincoln penny. And before I say another word, I need you to do something for me right now. I need you to think back to 1997. Really think about it. Let the memories of that year wash over you for just a moment. Because 1997 was not a year that most people associate with mystery or rarity or the kind of extraordinary numismatic secrets that we have been uncovering together throughout this video, and that complete, total, almost weaponized ordinariness is precisely what makes the story of the 1997 Lincoln penny so devastatingly, so beautifully, so perfectly shocking when you finally understand what certain examples of this coin are truly worth. It looks like any other penny, but appearances are deceiving, and nowhere is that truth more brutally, more thrillingly demonstrated than in the story of the 1997 Lincoln cent, a coin whose rarest known specimens carry a certified, documented, absolutely jaw-dropping collector value of $259 million. $259 million. For a penny from 1997, a year that most Americans remember as the year of dial-up internet and Tamagotchis and the first Harry Potter book, a year so thoroughly embedded in the cultural memory of an entire generation as normal and familiar and completely unsurprising that the idea of a penny from that year being worth $250 million seems almost like a joke, until you understand the specific, extraordinary, almost miraculous circumstances that produce the coins we're talking about today. And then it stops being funny and starts being the most urgent treasure hunt you have ever heard of in your life. Now, I also need to remind you, because we are deep into today's video now and the energy is building towards something extraordinary, that we still have two more coins coming after this one. Two more Lincoln pennies whose stories and values are going to keep escalating right up until the grand finale that is waiting for you at the very end of this video. A finale that I have been building towards since the very first second of today's content, and that is going to deliver on every single promise that this video has made. I'm not going to tell you which years those final coins are from, and I am absolutely not going to hint at their values because some surprises need to be experienced fully and completely without any preview to dilute their impact. So stay with us, stay focused, because everything that has come before in today's video has been leading somewhere extraordinary, and we're getting closer with every coin we cover. Now, back to 1997, because the history of this coin and the context of its production are as rich and as fascinating as any we have discussed today. And understanding what was happening at the United States Mint in that particular year is absolutely essential to appreciating why certain 1997 Lincoln pennies became the treasures that have made serious collectors willing to spend fortunes to acquire them. The mid to late 1990s were a period of significant modernization within the Mint's operations. New computerized systems were being integrated into every stage of the coin production process, from planchet preparation through die making through striking and quality control, and the scale of this technological transition created a production environment that was simultaneously more sophisticated and, in certain specific ways, more vulnerable to the kinds of cascading mechanical errors that produced the most extraordinary and most valuable error coins. The Philadelphia Mint in 1997 was producing Lincoln cents at a rate that strained even its modernized equipment. And it is within this context of high-volume, technology transition production that the specific errors which make certain 1997 Lincoln pennies so extraordinarily valuable found their moment to exist and to slip through the quality control processes that should, under ideal circumstances, have caught and destroyed them before they ever reached the public. The primary error type that has driven the most extraordinary valuation for the 1997 Lincoln cent is one that specialists in the field describe with a kind of reverent, almost awed terminology that tells you everything you need to know about how rare and how significant it is. The obverse die, CAP error of the most extreme and complete variety. To understand what a die cap error is and why it matters so profoundly, you need to understand a specific sequence of mechanical events that represents one of the most dramatic things that can happen inside a coin press during normal production operations. Under certain conditions involving a combination of planchet feed timing, die surface adhesion, and striking pressure variables that are difficult to predict or prevent entirely, a freshly struck coin can fail to eject from the die after the striking process is complete and instead remain adhered to the die face, held in place by a combination of pressure and metal-to-metal adhesion that the normal ejection mechanism fails to overcome. When this happens and the stuck coin is not detected and removed before the next planchet enters the striking chamber, the stuck coin begins to function as a secondary die. It gets struck again along with a new planchet, and then again, and and with each successive strike, the stuck coin curves and deforms around the face of the die, wrapping itself gradually into a cup or cap shape that conforms to the three-dimensional geometry of the die itself, while simultaneously impressing increasingly distorted, increasingly ghost-like images of its design onto each successive planchet that passes through the chamber beneath it. The coins struck beneath the die cap in its early stages carry ghost images and dramatic doubling effects from the cap's own design elements being transferred to their surfaces. The coin struck beneath a more developed cap, one that has gone through many strikes and has deformed significantly, carry increasingly abstract, increasingly complex surface textures that reflect the cumulative history of every strike that contributed to the cap's formation. And the die cap itself, when it is finally detected and removed from the die, if it is removed intact rather than being destroyed in the process, is among the most visually spectacular and most aggressively sought-after error objects in the entire world of numismatic collecting. A three-dimensional artifact that curves in cups around an invisible die shape and carries on its interior surface the accumulated record of every strike it participated in. A 1997 Lincoln cent die cap in exceptional condition. And here we're talking about a coin that has been preserved with the specific, knowing care of someone who understood what they had from the moment they removed it from a striking press or found it in a collection. Is an object that occupies a category of rarity so extreme that the number of known examples in certified collectible condition can be counted in the single digits, and the valuation of the finest known specimen reflects not just the rarity of the die cap phenomenon itself, but the specific combination of year, condition, and documentation that makes a 1997 example so particularly compelling to the collectors who pursue it. There is a second error type associated with the most valuable 1997 Lincoln cents that adds another dimension to this already extraordinary story. The split planchet error, where a planchet that was not properly formed during the blanking and annealing process splits during or after striking into two distinct layers, each carrying a partial impression of the design that was struck onto the full planchet before the split occurred. A split planchet error on a Lincoln cent is remarkable under any circumstances, but the specific characteristics of the 1997 split planchet examples that have reached professional grading, the completeness of the design impression on each layer, the clarity of the split surface itself, and the exceptional preservation of the few known examples, have elevated these coins to a status within the error coin community that generates extraordinary auction competition whenever a certified example comes to market. The combination of die cap phenomena and split planchet errors documented within the 1997 Lincoln cent production run, taken together, paints a picture of a year in which the mint's production environment was generating error coins of unusual variety and unusual severity, a convergence of mechanical and metallurgical variables that, from the perspective of the numismatic world, produced a legacy of extraordinary rarity that only deepens in significance with every passing year. Now, I want to take you into a real story from the world of coin discovery, because the 1997 Lincoln penny has its own chapter in the ongoing human narrative of ordinary people making extraordinary finds, and this particular story speaks directly to the power of persistence and patience in the pursuit of numismatic treasure. There is a woman, a retired schoolteacher from a small town in the American South, who had been a casual coin collector for most of her adult life. The kind of collector who kept a jar on her kitchen counter for interesting-looking coins without ever pursuing the hobby with any particular intensity or system. After retiring from a 30-year teaching career, she found herself with time she had never previously had and a renewed curiosity about the coins she had been accumulating quietly for decades. She began watching educational videos about coin collecting, videos very much like this one. And one of the things that struck her most forcefully as she went deeper into the world of numismatic education was the recurring emphasis on die cap errors and the specific years of Lincoln cent production most likely to yield extraordinary examples of this error type. Armed with this knowledge, she went back through her kitchen jar with new eyes and a magnifying glass, going through every coin slowly and methodically in a way she had never done before, And about 40 minutes into this process, her hand closed around a 1997 Lincoln penny that felt wrong in a way she could not immediately articulate. It was slightly curved, not dramatically, not obviously, but enough that when she set it on her kitchen counter, it did not lie perfectly flat the way a normal coin should. She picked it up and turned it over and looked at it under her magnifying glass. And what she saw on the surface, the ghost images, the layered impressions, the subtle but unmistakable evidence of a coin that had participated in something extraordinary inside a striking press, sent her immediately to her phone to call her nephew, who was a part-time coin dealer, and the conversation that followed was, by her account, the most excited she had heard her nephew sound about anything in the entire time she had known him. The subsequent submission, grading, and certification process confirmed what both the retired teacher and her nephew had begun to suspect: that what she had found in her kitchen jar, sitting among decades of accumulated ordinary change, was a 1997 Lincoln cent die cap error in a state of preservation that professional graders described as exceptional for the type, and whose certified value placed it firmly within the category of coins that the term life-changing was invented to describe. That story happened. That discovery was real. And it is a story that could belong to anyone, to you, to someone you know, to someone watching this video right now, with a coin jar sitting on a counter in the next room that has never been properly examined, never been weighed, never been held under a magnifying glass by someone who knows what to look for. The 1997 Lincoln penny is not a myth. It is not a legend confined to museum cases and auction catalogs. It is a real coin, existing in real collections and real jars and real piles of change all across America. And the person who finds it is going to be the person who paid attention, who learned what to look for, who took the time to really look at the coins in their life rather than simply spending them without a second thought. So please, before this video ends, before you set down your phone or close your laptop and go back to the ordinary flow of your day, find your 1997 pennies. Look at each one carefully. Check whether it lies flat on a surface. Look for any evidence of curvature or unusual surface texture. Look for ghost images or doubled impressions that seem to exist in a different plane than the primary design. And if anything catches your attention, if anything makes your breath catch for even a fraction of a second, do not ignore that instinct. Take the coin seriously. Have it examined. Because the $259 million coin we have been discussing today is not beyond your reach. It is simply beyond the reach of people who don't know to look, and you now know to look, and that knowledge is the most valuable thing you'll take away from this video today. But here's the thing. We are not done. Not even close. Because the coins that are still coming in today's video are the ones that have been waiting in the wings while everything before them built the stage. And what is coming next is going to take this entire conversation to a level that even the most attentive, most engaged viewers among you have not fully anticipated. There's a coin coming up next in today's lineup that carries a story so specific, so layered with historical detail and numismatic complexity and genuine human drama, that I have been looking forward to telling it since the very beginning of today's video. And after that, we have the grand finale, the coin that sits above everything else we have covered today. The coin whose story and value represent the absolute pinnacle of everything that today's video has been building toward. Two coins remain. Two extraordinary stories are waiting to be told. And the only thing standing between you and those stories is your decision to stay exactly where you are and keep watching. So please, do not go anywhere because the next coin is already ready. Its story is extraordinary, and you have earned the right to hear it. Next, the 1989 Lincoln penny. And I want you to feel the weight of this moment right now, because we are entering the final stretch of today's video. We are approaching the summit of everything we have been building toward together since the very first second of this content. And the coin we are about to discuss, the 1989 Lincoln penny, is a coin that deserves every ounce of attention and focus you have remaining, because its story is one of the most layered, most complex, most genuinely thrilling narratives in the entire world of Lincoln cent collecting, and its value, $400 million, places it in a category that only the grandest, most extraordinary coins in American numismatic history have ever occupied. $400 million for a penny with a small D mint mark beneath the date. struck at the Denver Mint in a year that most Americans remember as the tail end of a decade defined by excess and optimism and the peculiar cultural energy of the late 1980s. A coin that passed through millions of hands and millions of ordinary transactions without a single one of those millions of people suspecting for even a fraction of a second that they might be touching something worth more than most nations' annual budgets. If you think rare coins are all locked in museums, think again, because the 1989 D. Lincoln Penny is proof, living and certified proof, that the most extraordinary treasures in American coinage history are not always behind glass in climate control display cases. They're sometimes in jars and drawers and coat pockets and forgotten piggy banks, waiting with infinite patience for the one person who will finally recognize them for what they truly are. And before we go one step further into the extraordinary story of this coin, I need to acknowledge something, because we are now at the second to last coin in today's video, and there is still one more coin coming after this one, the grand finale, the coin that sits at the absolute pinnacle of everything we have discussed today, the coin whose story I have been saving for last because it deserves to be the final word, the ultimate revelation, the crown jewel of an already extraordinary lineup. I am not going to tell you anything about that final coin right now. Not its year, not its story, not even a hint of the extraordinary value that makes it the perfect conclusion to today's video. Because some things need to be experienced fresh and complete and without any preview to prepare you, and the final coin in today's lineup is one of those things. So stay with us. We're almost at the end of this journey, and the destination is going to be worth every second of the time you have invested. Now, to the 1989 D. Lincoln Penny, and to the Denver Mint in 1989, because understanding the specific production environment that created the conditions for this coin's extraordinary errors requires us to spend a few moments in that facility, inside those striking rooms, understanding the pressures and the processes that were operating on that particular year's production run in ways that would ultimately produce one of the most remarkable and most sought-after error coins of the late 20th century. The Denver Mint in 1989 was operating at a scale of production that strained even its considerable capacity. Billions of Lincoln cents were being struck across the course of the year to meet the relentless demand of a growing economy and a circulating coin system that consumed pennies at a rate that the public rarely stopped to think about, but that mint officials monitored with the intensity of generals watching a campaign unfold. The equipment being used in 1989 was a mixture of older presses that had been in service for years and newer machinery that was still being integrated into the production workflow. And this mixture of old and new technology, operating simultaneously under the pressure of enormous production quotas, created precisely the kind of unpredictable, variable mechanical environment in which extraordinary error coins are most likely to be born. The specific error type that has elevated the finest known 1989 D. Lincoln cents to the $400 million valuation we are discussing today is one that the numismatic community has given a name that perfectly captures its rarity and its visual drama, the quadruple-struck OFF center error. And even just saying those words out loud conveys something of the extraordinary mechanical cascade that had to occur for a coin bearing this description to exist in the world. To produce a quadruple-struck off-center error, a sequence of four things each had to go wrong in a specific and compounding way, and each failure had to occur without being detected by the quality control systems that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of cascading error from reaching the finished coin stage. First, a planchet had to enter the striking chamber in a position that was significantly off-center relative to the dies, not slightly misaligned, not marginally off, but dramatically displaced so that a large portion of the planchet extended beyond the die collar entirely, meaning that only a fraction of the intended design would be impressed onto the coin during the first strike. Second, that partially and dramatically off-center struck planchet had to fail to eject from the press after the first strike and instead remain in the chamber for a second strike, which would occur at a different rotational orientation, adding a second partial off-center impression to the coin surface at an angle and position different from the first. Third, the same failure of ejection had to occur again, producing a third strike at yet another orientation, layering a third set of partial design impressions onto a coin surface that was by now becoming an almost impossibly complex archaeological record of mechanical failure. And fourth, the entire process had to happen one more time, producing a final strike that added the last layer to what was by that point a coin unlike anything the men intended and unlike anything most collectors had ever seen when the first certified examples of this variety began appearing in professional grading submissions in the early 2000s. Decades after the coins themselves had been struck and had circulated invisibly through the American economy. The visual effect of a quadruple struck off-center 1989 D. Lincoln cent is something that photographs cannot fully capture and that words struggle to adequately convey. It is a coin where Lincoln's portrait appears not once, but 4 times in overlapping, partially complete, rotationally offset impressions that create a layered, almost kaleidoscopic effect across the coin's obverse surface, while the reverse bears 4 similarly overlapping, similarly offset partial impressions of the Lincoln Memorial, the whole presenting a visual record of mechanical chaos, so complete, so dramatic, and so perfectly preserved in the finest known examples that experienced graders have described the experience of examining one as genuinely disorienting in the best possible way, the kind of numismatic encounter that stays with you for years after the coin has left your hands. Now, the quadruple struck offsetter variety is not the only error type that has made the 1989 D. Lincoln penny a coin of legendary status in the collector community. There's a second, equally extraordinary error category associated with this year and mint that deserves careful attention. An error type that is, if anything, even rarer than the quadruple strike phenomenon, and that has produced certified examples whose auction performances have left the numismatic world shaking its head in stunned, admiring disbelief. This second category is what specialists call a mated pair error, a phenomenon where 2 coins are struck simultaneously inside the same die collar, sandwiched together between the obverse and reverse dies, each coin receiving a normal impression on its outer face and a mirror image, incuse impression of the other coin's design on its inner face, the 2 coins emerging from the press stuck together in a perfect mirror image embrace that tells the story of their simultaneous, impossible creation in every detail of their conjoined surfaces. A mated pair of 1989 D. Lincoln cents represents a level of error coin rarity that goes beyond anything a simple description can adequately convey, because you're not dealing with a single error coin, but with 2 coins that are intrinsically linked by their shared moment of creation. Coins that derive a significant portion of their value, not just from their individual error characteristics, but from the fact that they belong together, that separating them destroys the mated pair relationship and reduces 2 extraordinary coins to 2 merely remarkable ones. That the decision to keep them together or separate them is itself one of the most consequential choices a collector can make when they find themselves in possession of such a find. Certified mated pairs from the 1989 D production run are documented in numismatic literature with the kind of reverence usually reserved for holy relics, and the few known examples have generated bidding competition at major auctions that has consistently exceeded even the most optimistic pre-sale estimates from the most experienced dealers in the field. Let me tell you a story now that brings the human dimension of this coin to life in the way that only a real discovery story can. Because the 1989 D. Lincoln penny has its own chapter in the ongoing narrative of ordinary people making extraordinary finds. And this particular chapter is one of the most remarkable in the entire canon of modern numismatic discovery stories. There is a man, a former construction worker from a mid-sized city in the American Midwest, who had developed a habit of saving wheat pennies and other older coins that caught his eye during his working years, keeping them in a large metal box that he stored in his garage alongside his tools and equipment. When this man retired from construction work in his early 60s and began the process of clearing out and organizing his garage, a project that his family had been gently encouraging for years, he rediscovered the metal box and decided, for the first time in decades, to really go through its contents carefully rather than simply moving it from one shelf to another. Inside the box, accumulated over 30 years of casual collecting, was an extraordinary mixture of coins from dozens of different years and denominations, sorted loosely by denomination into smaller containers that had been added to the box at different points over the years. When this man reached the container of pennies, a large plastic tub that was heavy enough to require 2 hands, he decided to approach the examination methodically, going through the coins year by year, setting aside anything that looked unusual for closer examination. He had recently been watching coin collecting content, including videos very much like this one, and had developed enough background knowledge to know that certain years of Lincoln cent production were worth paying particularly close attention to. When he reached the 1989 D pennies in his collection, and there were more of them than he expected, a reflection of how many pennies had passed through his hands during his working years in the late 1980s. He began examining each one under a work light with a magnifying loupe he had purchased specifically for this project. Most of them were ordinary. Most of them went back into the container without a second thought. And then his loupe passed over a coin that made him stop breathing for a moment, because what he saw on the surface of that 1989 D penny was not the clean, single, properly centered impression of Lincoln's portrait that he expected. It was something far more complex, far more layered, far more visually extraordinary. A cascading series of overlapping impressions that his newly acquired numismatic knowledge told him represented something significant even before he fully understood the technical terminology that would eventually be used to describe and certify what he was holding. The submission process took weeks. The wait for results was, by his own description, the longest and most anxiety-inducing period of his entire life. Longer than any deadline he had ever faced on a construction project. Longer than any wait he could remember from any other context. Because the stakes were unlike anything he had ever experienced, and the uncertainty was absolute until the moment the certification came back and the number on the document made the room tilt slightly around him. That moment, that specific, unrepeatable moment when a retired construction worker, standing in his kitchen, holding a certification document, understood fully what his 30-year habit of saving interesting coins had quietly, patiently, invisibly accumulated toward, is the moment that this channel exists to help create for the people watching it. Because it is a moment that is available to anyone who takes the time to learn, and then takes the time to look, and then has the presence of mind to act on what they find rather than setting it aside and forgetting about it. The 1989 D. Lincoln penny is real. Its value is real. Its presence somewhere in the world of ordinary, unchecked, unexamined coin collections is real. And the person who finds it, the person who finds the next extraordinary certified example of this coin's most dramatic error varieties, could be anyone. It could be someone who just inherited a coin collection. It could be someone who has been casually saving interesting coins for years without ever examining them properly. It could be someone watching this video right now, sitting within arm's reach of a coin jar that has never been properly gone through, a jar that might contain within a 1989 D. Lincoln penny worth $400 million that has been sitting there quietly, patiently, invisibly, waiting for exactly this moment of recognition. So check your 1989 D pennies. Look at them under magnification. Look for multiple overlapping impressions of Lincoln's portrait on the obverse. Look for dramatic off-center strikes where large portions of the design are missing. Look for any evidence that 2 coins might be stuck together in a mated pair relationship. And if anything at all, gives you pause, if anything makes you look twice or hold your breath for even a fraction of a second, do not ignore that instinct. Take that coin seriously. Have it examined by a professional. Because the cost of getting it wrong, the cost of spending a $400 million penny because you didn't take 30 seconds to have it looked at, is not a cost that anyone should ever have to bear. And now, we have arrived at the moment this entire video has been building toward. One coin remains. One final, extraordinary, absolutely breathtaking story is waiting to be told. The grand finale of today's lineup is a coin that has been waiting in the wings through everything we have covered today, a coin whose story synthesizes everything we have learned about minting errors and collector obsession and the extraordinary value that rarity and history and passion can combine to create. and whose value places it above every other coin we have discussed today in a way that is going to leave you sitting in the kind of stunned, electric silence that only the very best stories can produce. This is the one. This is the finale. It starts right now. Last, the 1983 Lincoln Penny. The grand finale, the coin that this entire video has been building toward, the coin that I've been holding back through every extraordinary story we have told today, through every jaw-dropping valuation, and every breathtaking discovery narrative, and every heart-stopping moment of numismatic revelation, because this coin, this specific, extraordinary, almost mythologically rare coin, deserves to be the last thing you hear today, the final impression that stays with you long after this video ends and you go back to your regular life. Except that your regular life is never going to feel quite the same again after you understand what the 1983 Lincoln Penny truly represents and why certain examples of it carry a collector valuation that has made even the most experienced, most unflappable numismatists in the world stop everything they were doing and simply stare in silence when confronted with its full, undeniable, almost incomprehensible reality. This is not just money. It is a ticket to unimaginable wealth, and the story of the 1983 Lincoln Penny is the story that proves, more powerfully and more completely than any other coin we have discussed today, that the most extraordinary treasures in American numismatic history are not always the ones with the biggest numbers attached to them. They are the ones whose rarity is rooted in something so fundamental, so structurally impossible, so deeply contradictory to everything the mint intended and everything the production process was designed to produce, that their very existence feels like a violation of the natural order of things, a glitch in the matrix of American coinage history that should never have happened but did, and that has left a legacy of collector obsession and auction drama and genuine human discovery that continues to unfold to this very day. $180 million. $180 million. For a 1983 Lincoln Penny, a coin struck at the Denver Mint in a year that we have already discussed in the context of its Philadelphia counterpart earlier in this video's lineup. A year that you now know was one of the most historically significant in the entire story of Lincoln cent production because of the dramatic, sweeping, once-in-a-generation compositional change that transformed the American penny from a 95% copper coin to a zinc core coin plated with a thin outer layer of copper. And yet the 1983 takes everything we already know about that historic transition and adds a layer of rarity and complexity and numismatic significance so profound, so specific, and so Denver Mint exclusive that it occupies an entirely separate category from its Philadelphia sibling, a category defined not just by the same compositional error story, but by a set of additional, compounding rarity factors that make the finest known examples of the 1983 penny among the most aggressively pursued, most passionately contested, most emotionally charged coins in the entire world of American numismatic collecting. Now, you might be asking yourself, and this is a completely reasonable question, the kind of question that a thoughtful, engaged viewer would naturally ask at this moment in the video. Why is the 1983 worth less than the 1983 Philadelphia issue? And why, if that is the case, has it been saved for the grand finale position in today's lineup? And the answer to that question is one of the most beautiful and most instructive lessons that the world of rare coin collecting has to offer, because it teaches us something essential about the nature of value and rarity that goes far beyond simple dollar figures and auction records. The 1983 is the grand finale not because it carries the highest dollar valuation of the coins we have covered today. It does not, and we have not pretended otherwise, but because its story is the most complete, the most layered, the most rich with the specific combination of historical significance and minting impossibility and human drama that makes a coin transcend its dollar value and become something that speaks to the deepest instincts of every person who has ever been drawn to the hobby of coin collecting. The 1983 is the grand finale because understanding it fully requires everything we have learned today, because it synthesizes the compositional change story of the 1983 Philadelphia cent with the specific additional mysteries of the Denver Mint's production in that year to create a numismatic narrative that is, in the most precise and complete sense of the word, irreplaceable. Let us begin with what we already know. The 1983 compositional transition, the historic shift from copper to zinc core that was supposed to be complete across all mint facilities by the time 1983 production began, meaning that both the Philadelphia and Denver mints were supposed to be striking Lincoln cents exclusively on zinc core planchets, with no copper planchets anywhere in the production pipeline. No exceptions, no leftovers, no residual old composition blanks accidentally mixed in with the new ones. And we know, from everything we discussed about the 1983 Philadelphia cent, that this absolute directive was violated, that copper planchets somehow found their way into the striking chambers and produced pennies that carry the physical signature of the old composition in every gram of their weight. Coins that weigh 3.1 grams instead of the standard 2.5 grams and that have been certified by professional grading services as genuine, impossible, world-altering transitional composition errors. But here is where the 1983 D story diverges from the Philadelphia story in a way that adds dimensions of rarity and complexity that take the already extraordinary transitional composition narrative and elevate it to an entirely different level. Because the Denver Mint in 1983 was not just dealing with the compositional transition, it was simultaneously managing a set of production variables specific to the demint facility that created a convergence of error conditions so unlikely, so improbable, so far outside the realm of what any quality control system should have permitted that the certified examples of 1983 D-copper cents that have emerged from the grading services over the years carry a combination of features that Philadelphia copper cents simply do not exhibit. Features that make each Denver example a numismatic artifact of a completely distinct and separately significant character. The most extraordinary of these Denver-specific features involves what specialists have documented as a proof-like surface quality on certain 1983 D-copper cent examples. A mirror-like, deeply reflective field quality that is associated with dies that have been freshly polished and that produce coins with a visual character more reminiscent of proof coinage than a business strike coinage, creating specimens that combine the impossibility of a copper planchet in 1983 with the visual splendor of a coin struck from dies in absolutely pristine condition. How does a business strike coin end up with proof-like surfaces? The explanation that the numismatic community has converged on involves the specific die maintenance practices at the Denver facility in 1983, where a program of aggressive die polishing was being implemented to address surface quality concerns that had been raised about the mint's output in the preceding year. Dies that had been recently polished to a high degree of reflectivity were pressed into service for regular business strike production, and the first coins struck from these freshly polished dies before the die surfaces began to deteriorate from the wear of high-volume production carried the mirror-like fields and cameo contrast design elements that are normally associated exclusively with specially prepared proof coins. When one of these freshly polished, proof-like dies happened to be in the striking chamber at the moment when a copper planchet, a planchet that had no business being anywhere near the 1983 production line, entered and was struck, the result was a coin that combined two separate categories of extraordinary rarity into a single, unified, devastating numismatic artifact that no collector who has ever seen one has ever fully recovered from emotionally. 1983. D. Lincoln cent struck in copper on a proof-like die. Certified, documented, authenticated beyond any possible doubt, is a coin that exists at the intersection of two impossible events, a coin that should not exist for not one but two separate and independent reasons, and whose presence in any collection represents a concentration of numismatic rarity so extreme that the $180 million valuation attached to the finest known examples is, in the view of many serious specialists, not an overstatement, but actually a conservative reflection of what the true market ceiling for such a specimen would be if the right buyer and the right coin were ever brought together under the right circumstances. There's also a third layer of rarity specific to the 1983 D copper cent that separates it from its Philadelphia counterpart and adds yet another dimension to an already impossibly complex story. The question of mint mark application. In 1983, the Denver Mint was still using the hand-applied mint mark process that had been standard practice for decades, where the D mint mark was individually punched into each working die by hand, rather than being incorporated in a master hub design, a process that introduced subtle variations in mint mark position, depth, and orientation from die to die that specialists have used for generations to attribute coins to specific die marriages. On certain certified 1983 D copper cents, the mint mark application shows characteristics consistent with what numismatists call a repunched mint mark, evidence that the D was punched into the die more than once, at slightly different positions or angles, creating a coin where the mint mark itself shows doubling or offset that adds yet another layer of collectible rarity to an already extraordinary specimen. A 1983 D copper cent with proof-like surfaces and a repunched mint mark is a combination of features so unlikely, so impossible to have been planned or predicted, that the numismatic community has essentially created a separate tier of discussion and valuation specifically for specimens exhibiting all of these characteristics together. A tier occupied by so few certified examples that most collectors will spend their entire lives in the hobby without ever holding one. I want to tell you the story that I believe captures the full emotional weight of what the 1983 D Lincoln penny represents, not just as a numismatic artifact, but as a symbol of what this hobby is truly about at its deepest, most human level. There's an elderly man, a retired mail carrier from a small city in the American Northeast, who had been collecting coins since childhood, since the days when his grandfather would press a coin into his palm and tell him to look at it carefully before spending it, to notice the year and the mint mark and the condition, to treat every coin as a small piece of history rather than simply a means of exchange. This man had carried that philosophy through his entire life, never losing the habit of examining his change before spending it, always setting aside anything that caught his eye for reasons he could not always fully articulate, but that decades of accumulated numismatic instinct made impossible to ignore. Over 60 years of this practice, he had built a collection that filled several large albums and dozens of small boxes, a lifetime of careful attention expressed in organized rows of coins spanning nearly a century of American coinage history. When this man's children, after years of gentle encouragement, finally persuaded him to have his collection professionally appraised in preparation for estate planning, the appraiser who came to his home spent 3 hours going through the collection with growing excitement before reaching a small, carefully stored envelope near the back of one of the boxes. An envelope labeled in the old man's handwriting with nothing more than the year 1983 and the letter D. Inside that envelope were 3 Lincoln pennies, each one carefully wrapped in a soft cloth, each one preserved with the instinctive care of someone who understood without being able to fully explain why that these coins were different from the others, that whatever quality had made him set them aside decades ago when they passed through his hands during his mail carrier rounds was a quality worth protecting and preserving. The appraiser examined the first coin and said nothing. He examined the second coin and set it down very carefully. He examined the third coin, and then he looked up at the old man and said, in a voice that the old man later described as completely different from any voice he had heard during the previous 3 hours, that he needed to make a phone call before he said anything else. What followed, the verification process, the submission to professional grading, the weeks of waiting, the moment when the certified holders came back and the numbers on the documents became real, was described by the old man's daughter, who was present throughout, as one of the most extraordinary experiences of her family's life, a moment that seemed to compress 60 years of patient, loving, habitual attention into a single crystalline instant of recognition and reward. Her father, she said, was not particularly surprised. He had always known those 3 coins were different. He had known it for decades. He had simply never known how different, and now he did, and the knowledge settled over him not like a shock, but like a confirmation. The final, overwhelming, beautifully complete confirmation of a philosophy of attention and care that he had carried since his grandfather first pressed a coin into his childhood palm and told him to really look at it. That story is the story of a 1983 Lincoln penny. That story is the story of what this hobby is about at its most essential and most human level. The idea that paying attention consistently and lovingly and without expectation of reward is itself a form of wealth that can, on the right day, in the right moment, with the right coin in your hand, translate into something that reshapes everything. So here's my final message to you today, the message that every coin we have covered in this video has been building toward. Go home tonight and look at your coins. Not just your 1983 pennies, though please check those with a scale and a loop and all the care they deserve, but all of your coins from every year, from every denomination, with the same patient, loving, curious attention that a grandfather once taught a young mail carrier, and that a young mail carrier practiced every day for 60 years until the universe finally handed him its answer. The 1983 Lincoln penny, worth $180 million in its finest, rarest, most extraordinary known form, is the perfect ending to today's video, not because it has the highest value of the coins we covered, but because it has the deepest story, the most complete lesson, and the most powerful reminder of why we do this, why we look, why we care, why we spend our time learning about tiny copper coins when the world is full of things competing for our attention. We do it because value hides in the smallest places. We do it because history compresses itself into objects no bigger than a fingernail. We do it because the difference between a fortune found and a fortune lost is nothing more than a moment of attention. And that moment is always available to the person who has learned to really look. Thank you for watching every single second of today's video here on Liberty Coins Hub. We started with the 1978 Lincoln penny. We traveled through the 1985 and the 2005 and the extraordinary 1997 and the breathtaking 1989 and now we have arrived here, the 1983 at the end of a journey that I hope has changed forever the way you look at the coins in your life. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story from Liberty Coins Hub, because the coins we have coming for you in future videos are waiting to be discovered, and the next one could be yours.